Every Sunday, he would go out to buy bread and take 2 hours. For 15 years, I believed his excuses until the day the baker couldn't take it anymore and told me the truth that destroyed my life. Good afternoon, my dear viewers. I'm Martha Jane Williams. I'm 87 years old, and today I'm going to share with you a story that I've kept deep in my heart for a very long time. A story of pain, betrayal, but also of overcoming. Before I begin, I'd like to ask you who are watching now to leave a like on this video, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. This helps me tremendously to continue sharing my experiences with you. I was born in 1938 in Mill Creek, a town so small it barely showed up on maps. In those days, life was very different. We didn't have all this modern technology, no cell phones, internet, all these things you have today. We lived a simple but honest life. My father was a carpenter, and my mother took care of the house and 7 children. I was the third oldest. From a young age, I was raised to be a good wife and mother. In school, I learned to read and write. But what my mother was most concerned with teaching me was how to cook well, sew, embroider, and take care of a home. A woman must know how to care for her husband and children, she would always say, and I believed that with all my heart. I met Howard in 1959 at a 4th of July church picnic. He was 23, I was 21. He was handsome, tall, strong, with a well-trimmed mustache that was fashionable at the time. He worked as an accountant at the only bank in town, a respected job. Everyone said he was a good catch. My father liked him right away because Howard was well-mannered, didn't drink, and went to church every Sunday. We dated for a year, always with a chaperone, of course. In those days, there wasn't the freedom that exists today. If we wanted to talk alone, it had to be in the living room of my parents' house, with the door open and someone always passing by to keep an eye on us. Even so, I fell in love with him, with his gentle manner, the beautiful words he told me, the dreams he shared with me. We got married in June 1960. It was a simple but beautiful wedding. My dress was made by my godmother, who was the best seamstress in the area. The whole town attended. That night, I was the happiest woman in the world. I still remember the feeling of putting the ring on my finger, of swearing eternal love before the pastor, of hearing my mother crying with emotion. At first, it was all like a dream. We moved into a small rented house near downtown. It was small, but I kept it immaculate. I woke up early to prepare Howard's breakfast before he went to work. I cared for every detail with love. At night, when he came home, I always had his favorite food ready on the table. On weekends, we visited our families or received friends for coffee. Our first daughter, Teresa, was born in 1962. Then came Anthony in 1964, and finally Sebastian in 1967. 3 beautiful, healthy children who filled our home with joy. Of course, life became more difficult with the children. Money was tight sometimes, but we managed. I took in laundry on the side, hidden from Howard. He didn't like me working. He said it was his obligation to support the family and that I had to take care of the children. The 1960s passed by, and our life followed that tranquil rhythm of a small town. Howard was promoted at the bank, earning a little better. We managed to buy our own house in 1969, a dream come true. It was a 3-bedroom house with a yard where I planted my vegetables and kept a few chickens. The children were growing up strong and well-educated. Howard was a present father, played with them when he came home from work, helped with school homework. Every Sunday we went to church together. I would dress in my best dress, put on a little hat, gloves. The children were also well-dressed. After church, it was tradition to buy fresh bread at Mrs. Josephine's bakery, the only bakery in town. Her bread was famous, baked in a wood-fired oven with that crispy crust. In the first years of marriage, we would all go together. As the children grew older, I started staying home to get lunch started, while Howard went to get the bread. It was in the 1970s that things began to change, so slowly that I didn't even notice. When was it exactly? I think around 1974 or 1975. Mrs. Josephine's daughter, Celeste, had finished her studies in the city and returned to town. She was a pretty, modern girl, about 15 years younger than me. She had studied pastry making and returned to help her mother at the bakery, bringing new recipes, different cakes that nobody made around here. It was around this time that Howard started taking longer to buy bread. At first, it was just a few extra minutes, then half an hour. Soon he would leave after church around 10 o'clock and only come back at almost noon. When I asked why he was taking so long, he always had an excuse. I ran into Jim and we got to talking about politics. Or Mrs. Josephine was having problems with the oven, and I helped out. Or even, I went to see if Jack had that tool I need to fix the gate. And I, fool that I was, believed him. Why wouldn't I? He had been my husband for so many years, father of my children, a man respected by everyone in town. Howard had never given me reason to doubt him before. But gradually, other things started changing too. He began to dress up more to go to the bakery. He put on cologne, combed his hair carefully. Once I even commented, "My, so much effort just to buy bread?" He laughed, said he was going to church, had to look presentable. I also noticed that he began to grow more distant, didn't talk to me as much in the evenings. He said he was tired from work, almost never touched me as a husband anymore. On the few occasions it happened, it was quick, without affection, as if it were an obligation. I thought it was normal after so many years of marriage that the fire cools down over time. The years passed like this, the children growing up, Howard increasingly distant, and I increasingly suspicious, although I didn't have the courage to face my own thoughts. What would I do if I discovered something I didn't want to know? I had nowhere to go. I had no way to support 3 children on my own, had no education beyond elementary school. In my mind, marriage was forever, in sickness and in health, in joy and in sorrow. Until that Sunday in March 1980 arrived. Howard had traveled to the city on bank business, a meeting. It was the first time in years that he hadn't gone to buy bread after church. And for some reason, that day, something inside me said it was time for me to go to the bakery myself. I put on my floral dress, pulled my hair back in a simple bun, and after church, instead of going home like the other women, I headed to Mrs. Josephine's bakery. The church bell was still ringing when I pushed the door, making the little bell above it tinkle. Little did I know that bell announced not only my arrival at the bakery, but also the end of 15 years of what I thought was a perfect marriage. When I entered the bakery that Sunday in March, I immediately noticed something was different. Mrs. Josephine's bakery was usually full after church, with families buying bread and pastries for Sunday lunch. But that day, strangely, it was empty. Only Mrs. Josephine was behind the counter, arranging some bread in a wicker basket. When she saw me, her face turned pale. She looked like she had seen a ghost. We had known each other for over 20 years. Our children had gone to school together. We participated in the same church events, but I had never seen that expression on her face. "Mrs. Martha," she said, her voice trembling a little. "What a surprise to see you here." "Where is Howard?" "He traveled for work," I replied, looking around, admiring the bread on display. The smell of yeast and freshly baked dough filled the air. "I came to buy bread for lunch." She nodded, but didn't move to serve me. She stood there, hands clutching her white apron, looking at me in a way that made me uncomfortable. "Are you feeling all right, Mrs. Josephine?" I asked, finding this behavior strange. That's when I saw her eyes fill with tears. Without saying anything, she closed the bakery door, turned the sign to closed, and invited me to sit at a small table in the corner, where customers sometimes had coffee. "Mrs. Martha," she began, her voice low and laden with guilt. "There's something you need to know, something that has been eating away at me for years, but I never had the courage to tell you." I felt a chill in my stomach. You know when you already know what you're going to hear, but still aren't prepared for it? That was the feeling. "Howard," she hesitated, looking away. "He never buys bread here, Mrs. Martha." I was confused. "What do you mean? Every Sunday he brings fresh bread." "Yes, "He brings it," she interrupted me. "But it's not from here that he buys it. He enters through the back door and goes straight up to Celeste's room." The world stopped in that instant. The ticking of the wall clock seemed deafening. Tick-tock, tick-tock, each second marking the end of the life I knew. "What?" I managed to murmur, my mouth dry, my hands trembling. "It's been going on for about 5 years," Mrs. Josephine continued, the words now coming like a flood. "It started shortly after she came back from the city. I discovered by chance one Sunday when I came back early from church because I wasn't feeling well. I heard laughter upstairs. She kept talking, but my ears were ringing. 5 years. 5 years of lies. 5 years of humiliation. While she described how she confronted her daughter and Howard, how they swore they loved each other, how she ended up allowing them to continue meeting as long as they were discreet, all I could think about were the Sundays, one after another, when he came back home, sat at the table with us, said grace before meals, shared the bread he had supposedly just bought but which came from another bakery. "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked when I finally found my voice. "Because I can't take it anymore," she replied, drying her tears with the corner of her apron. "Every time I see you in church with your children, dressed so neatly, I feel like an accomplice. Celeste says he's going to leave you, that he's just waiting for the youngest to finish school. But I know men, Mrs. Martha. He won't leave the comfort of the home you've built. He'll want both." I stood up slowly. My legs felt like jelly. I didn't cry. It's strange, but I couldn't cry. It was as if a part of me already knew, as if the pieces of a puzzle were finally falling into place. The unexplained absences, the lack of interest, the Sundays increasingly spent away from home. "Thank you for telling me, Mrs. Josephine," I said, adjusting my purse on my arm. "I'll buy bread somewhere else." It was the only thing I could say. I left the bakery feeling the hot March sun on my face, but a coldness inside my chest that seemed like it would never go away. I walked home slowly, as if carrying an enormous weight. The cobblestone streets, which I knew so well, seemed different now, as if I were seeing everything for the first time. I passed by the square where Howard and I had dated, by the church where we were married, by the school where we had enrolled our children. Each place held a memory, and each memory was now tainted. When I got home, the boys were playing ball in the yard. Teresa, now 18, was in the kitchen getting lunch started, as I had taught her. She looked so much like me at her age, the same brown hair, the same large eyes. Would she have the same fate too? "Mom, where's the bread?" she asked when she saw me come in. "I forgot to buy it," I replied, going straight to the bedroom that I had shared with Howard for 20 years. I sat on the bed, and finally, the tears came. I cried silently so the children wouldn't hear. I cried for the time lost, for the trust betrayed, for the humiliation of probably being the last to know. In a small town like ours, how many people knew? How many commented behind my back? "There goes Martha, the poor woman whose husband cheats with the baker's daughter." As the tears flowed, I began to think about the future. What would I do now? Confront Howard when he returned from his trip? Pretend I didn't know? Leave? To where? With what money? A separated woman in that time and place was viewed almost like a criminal. People would talk, point, judge. My children would suffer. Howard's family, which had also become my family after so much time, would turn their backs on me. Perhaps even my own parents and siblings would blame me, ask what I had done to lose my husband. That afternoon, after serving lunch to the boys without bread, I went to the back of the wardrobe and took out a small box where I kept the little money I managed to save from groceries, from household purchases. It wasn't much, just a few bills, but it was something of mine that Howard didn't know existed. In the days that followed, while Howard was away, I made a decision. I wouldn't confront him immediately. I needed a plan. I needed to prepare. If he was planning to leave me when Sebastian finished school, as Celeste had told her mother, I needed to anticipate this. When Howard returned from his trip 3 days later, I acted normally. I served his favorite dinner, asked about the meeting at the bank, let him kiss me on the cheek as he did every night. He didn't notice anything different. How could he? He hadn't really looked at me in years. The following Sunday was the most difficult. Seeing him dress carefully, put on the same cologne as always, smooth his hair, already thinning on top of his head, knowing for whom all that care was intended. Hearing him say, "I'm going to buy bread, be back soon," while adjusting his watch on his wrist, checking how much time he would have with her. "Get it from somewhere else today," I said, without raising my eyes from the embroidery I was pretending to work on. "I heard that Mrs. Josephine's bread isn't good. Someone mentioned it at church." He hesitated for a moment, but agreed. He returned an hour later with bread from another bakery on the other side of town. I didn't comment on the delay, nor would I anymore. From that day on, I began my plan in silence. First, I started saving more money. Every penny I could save went into my secret box. I began doing more hidden sewing work, not just washing clothes, but small repairs, hems, adjustments. Clients would come when Howard was at work, and I charged little, but I charged. I also began to learn more. Teresa brought books from the library for me. At 42, I started studying in secret, reading at night when everyone was asleep. I learned about fabrics, about more advanced cutting and sewing, about how to run a small business. Each page I read was a step away from that life of lies. In June 1980, 3 months after Mrs. Josephine's revelation, something happened that accelerated my plans. Teresa, my firstborn, came to me with news. She had been accepted to study at the university in the city. She would be the first person in the family to have a college degree. The pride I felt was immense, but soon came the worry. How would we pay for her studies? When we told Howard, he immediately said it was impossible. "A young lady's place is near her family, finding a good husband," he said, without taking his eyes off the newspaper. "Education is a waste of time and money." I saw in my daughter's eyes the same dream I had had at her age, fading away. The difference was that I wouldn't allow this to happen to her. "She's going," I said firmly, surprising myself and everyone at the table, "even if I have to work twice as hard to pay for it." Howard looked at me as if I had gone crazy. Then he laughed. "And where are you going to get the money? You don't even work." That was the last straw. At that moment, I decided not only that my daughter would study, but that my escape plan needed to accelerate. What was holding me back now? The fear of what people would say, the financial dependence, and what about self-respect? What about the dignity I wanted to teach my children? After dinner, when we were alone, Teresa hugged me, crying. "Thank you, Mom, but Dad is right. We don't have the money." "Don't worry," I replied, holding her hands. "Your mother has more resources than your father imagines." That night, I told her about my secret sewing work, about the money I had been saving. I didn't tell her about the betrayal. I didn't want to tarnish the image she had of her father, but I said I was planning some changes. "You're going to study, honey, and I'm going to make sure of it." The look of hope in her eyes gave me the strength I needed for the next steps. If I could do this for her, maybe I could do something for myself too. Something I never imagined I would have the courage to do, start life over at 42. That's when I realized that Howard's betrayal, as painful as it was, might have been the opportunity I needed to free myself, to find a Martha who had been dormant inside me for 2 decades. In the months that followed, I worked harder than ever. During the day, I kept the house as always, so that Howard wouldn't suspect anything. I washed, ironed, cooked, took care of the plants, smiled when necessary, responded when asked. At night, after everyone was asleep, I sewed by the light of a dim lamp in the small back room we used as a pantry. My hands would ache, my eyes burned, but each finished dress, each curtain made, meant a few more dollars in my secret box. July passed, then August. September came with its rains, washing the cobblestone streets of Mill Creek. The money grew slowly, but it grew. Teresa secretly helped me by selling my sewing to school friends, to neighbors, when her father wasn't around. Anthony and Sebastian didn't know anything. They were still too young to carry that kind of secret. In October, I reached out to my friend Dorothy, who had moved to Riverdale, a larger town about 50 miles away. Dorothy had been a widow for 5 years and managed a small stationery store that her husband had left her. I wrote a letter after thinking carefully about the right words. Dear friend, I need your help. I am planning to move with my children to start a new life. Is there any possibility of renting a small space in your town to open a sewing studio? And do you know of any simple house to rent? I have some savings, not much, but enough for the first few months. The response took 2 weeks to arrive. When it finally came, I read it hidden in the bathroom, heart racing. Martha, I was surprised by your letter. What happened? But whatever it is, you can count on me. There's a small vacant room next to my stationery store that would be suitable for a small studio. And I know a landlord who rents simple houses at a fair price. Come visit me so we can talk more. I needed to find an excuse to travel alone, something I had never done in 20 years of marriage. The opportunity arose when Howard mentioned that he needed to go to the Federal Reserve in the city for an important meeting and would be away for an entire weekend. I've been thinking, I said casually during dinner, since you'll be away, maybe I could visit my cousin Louise, whom I haven't seen in years. She's sick, you know. Teresa can take care of the boys for a day. Howard looked at me suspiciously, but he had no way to deny such a simple and seemingly innocent request. Reluctantly, he agreed, warning that I should be back Sunday night to receive him. Instead of visiting a non-existent cousin, I took the bus to Riverdale on a Saturday in November 1980. Dorothy was waiting for me at the bus station, a welcoming smile on her face, marked by the years. My friend, what a surprise to see you here, she said as she hugged me. What's really happening? As we walked to her house, I told her everything, the betrayal, the lie, the lost years, my plan to start over. She listened in silence, squeezing my hand when the tears came. You're much braver than I ever imagined, Martha, she said when I finished, and you can count on me for whatever you need. That same day, Dorothy showed me the small room next to her stationery store. It was small, with just one window, but clean and well located. The rent was reasonable. Then we visited a modest house in the working-class neighborhood. 2 bedrooms, living room, kitchen, a small backyard. Nothing compared to our house in Mill Creek, but it would be enough for the 4 of us. Can I hold the place for a month? Said the landlord, a gentleman with a graying mustache. After that, I'll rent it to whoever comes first. I returned home that night with a strange feeling in my chest. It was fear, yes, but it was also something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope, a real possibility of a fresh start. While the bus cut through the darkness of the road, looking at the distant lights of the farms, I mentally did my calculations. The money I had saved would cover 3 months of rent for the house and the small room, plus some for basic sewing supplies. It would be tight, very tight. Teresa would have to postpone college for a year to work and help me. The boys would have to adapt to a new school, new friends, but it was possible. For the first time in months, I felt that it was really possible. December arrived with its cold and the preparations for Christmas. Like every year, I decorated the house, prepared the traditional foods, bought simple presents for the children. For Howard, I bought a tie, a safe, meaningless gift. For myself, secretly, I bought something I had never had, a little notebook with a lock. In it, I began to write my plans, my fears, my hopes. On Christmas Eve, while they slept, I wrote in my notebook the date when I would confront Howard, January 15th, 1981. After Epiphany, after the holidays, when things returned to normal, I would give him the chance to explain, to defend himself, not because I believed there could be a possible explanation, but because after 20 years, he at least deserved that much. And then, regardless of what he said, I would announce my decision. Christmas passed, then New Year's. We entered 1981 with fireworks and hugs, wishes of happiness that sounded empty to me. I smiled, served cheap champagne, let Howard kiss me when the clock struck midnight. I thought, this is the last New Year I spend pretending. January 15th dawned rainy. A fine, constant rain that fogged the windows and made everything gray. I prepared a special breakfast for the children. When they left for school, I tidied the house carefully, as I always did. I chose a simple but pretty dress that I had sewn myself. I put my hair up in a discreet bun. I applied light lipstick, something I rarely did on a common morning. Howard came home for lunch, as he always did. That day I prepared his favorite dish, fried chicken with mashed potatoes. He ate in silence, complimented the food, then got up to return to the bank. "Can we talk before you leave?" I asked, keeping my voice firm. He looked at me surprised. In 20 years of marriage, I rarely asked to talk. It was always he who determined when and what we would talk about. "I'm in a hurry, Martha," he said, already picking up his coat. "It's important," I insisted, indicating the chair. "It won't take long." Reluctantly, he sat down again. His face showed impatience, perhaps slight annoyance at having his routine interrupted. I took a deep breath. It was now. After months of planning, sleepless nights, hidden tears, it was now. "I know about you and Mrs. Josephine's daughter," I said, looking directly into his eyes. "I know about the Sundays at the bakery." His face changed instantly. First surprise, then denial, and finally anger. Never fear or shame. That marked me. He didn't feel afraid of losing me, nor ashamed of what he had done. "Who told you these lies?" he asked, rising abruptly. "Does it matter?" I replied calmly. "Is it true or not?" He ran his hand through his hair, walked from one side of the kitchen to the other. For a moment, I thought he would deny it to the end, but then something changed in his face. A kind of resignation, perhaps even relief at no longer having to lie. "You don't understand, Martha," he said, his voice lower. "A man has needs. Celeste is young, different. She makes me feel alive." Each word was like a stab, not for the revelation itself that I already knew, but for the casualness with which he admitted it, as if it were natural, expected. "And me?" I asked. "What do I make you feel after 20 years together, 3 children raised?" He shrugged, a gesture that said everything without saying anything. Then he tried an approach, perhaps thinking he could calm me down as he did when the boys were little and had some whim. "Look, this doesn't change anything between us. You're my wife, the mother of my children. Celeste is something else." It was at that moment, seeing the expression on his face, a mixture of condescension and certainty, that I would accept anything to keep the marriage, that all the pain of the last months transformed into something different, a strength I didn't know I had. "I'm leaving," I announced. "Me and the children." He laughed, literally laughed in my face. "And where will you go? With what money? You are nothing without me, Martha. You have no education, no job, nothing." "I have more than you imagine," I replied, keeping calm. "I have savings, I have a place to stay, and I have a plan to support my children." His laughter disappeared. For the first time, I saw genuine confusion in his eyes, perhaps even a little fear. "What are you talking about? What savings? What plan?" "I've been working in secret for years, Howard, sewing on the side while you were at the bank, or with her." He was silent for a moment, processing the information. Then the anger returned. "You can't take my children," he said through clenched teeth. "I won't allow it." "They can choose," I replied. "Teresa already knows I'm leaving. The boys will know today when they come back from school. If they want to stay with you, I won't stop them." "This is madness," he shouted, hitting the table. "You won't make it. You'll starve. You'll have to come back crawling." "I prefer to starve with dignity than to live well with lies," I replied, surprising myself with the firmness in my voice. He continued shouting, threatening, alternating between anger and attempts to make me change my mind. He talked about what people would say, the shame it would be for the family, how I was being selfish. I sat there at the kitchen table, which had been my kingdom for 2 decades, listening to everything in silence. When he finally tired, he left, slamming the door, saying that when he came back at night, I would have come to my senses. As soon as the house was quiet, I went up to the bedroom and took out the suitcases I had discreetly prepared in the previous weeks. One for each child, one for me, just the essentials. Clothes, documents, some photographs. The material memories of 20 years fit into 4 small suitcases. In the afternoon, when Teresa, Anthony, and Sebastian returned from school, I sat down with them in the living room. I explained that their father and I hadn't been living well for a long time, that I had decided to start a new life in Riverdale. I didn't mention the betrayal. They didn't need to carry that burden. I have a place for us to stay, and I'm going to open a small sewing studio, I explained. It will be difficult at first, but we'll manage. You can choose to come with me or stay with your father. Teresa, who already knew part of the plan, immediately said she would come with me. Anthony, at 16, was silent for a while, then asked if he could think about it. Sebastian, the youngest at 13, started crying. Why can't we all stay together? He asked between sobs. I hugged him tight, feeling his skinny body tremble against mine. Sometimes staying together does more harm than good, my son. But no matter where we are, we'll always be a family. That night, Howard didn't come home. We all stayed up, waiting, tense. Anthony finally said he would come with me but would visit his father on weekends. Sebastian reluctantly said the same. The next day, January 16, 1981, I left a letter on the kitchen table, explaining where we would be, saying that he could visit the boys whenever he wanted. I took the 4 suitcases, called the 3 children, and we walked out the front door, heads held high, towards the bus station. While we waited for the bus, I looked at the blue January sky. The rain from the day before had washed everything, leaving the air clean and fresh. I took a deep breath, feeling as if I were truly breathing for the first time in years. Are you ready? I asked my children when the bus stopped in front of us, doors opening. 3 heads nodded, eyes mixing fear and hope. We got on together, leaving behind not only Mill Creek, but 20 years of my life. 20 years of lies, of submission, of a half-existence. The bus began to move, and with it, my new life. I was 42, with 3 children to raise, some savings in my pocket, and a dream of independence. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing. I would never again be the Martha who accepted scraps of affection, who pretended not to see the truth, who lived in the shadow of a man. Looking out the bus window, as the houses of Mill Creek faded into the distance, a tear ran down my face. It wasn't of sadness, it was of relief, and perhaps, just maybe, a little bit of pride in myself. Arriving in Riverdale with 3 children and 4 suitcases was like being born again. The first month in the new town was the most difficult of my life, even more difficult than discovering the betrayal. We settled into the simple little house that I had visited before. 2 small bedrooms, the girl in one, the boys in the other, a combined living room and kitchen, a cramped bathroom. The backyard had a maple tree that gave shade on hot summer afternoons. Our first night was on the floor, sleeping on blankets that Dorothy had kindly lent us. The next day, we bought 2 used mattresses that we shared among the 4 of us. It was little, it was simple, but it was ours, it was honest. The small room next to Dorothy's stationery store became my sewing studio. It didn't even have a name at first, just a piece of paper on the door where I wrote, "Alterations in Sewing." I brought my sewing machine, a wedding gift from my mother, one of the few things I made sure to bring, and some fabrics I had stored. On the first day, I sat for hours, waiting for customers who didn't come. "Give it time," Dorothy said, appearing with coffee at the end of the day. "People need to get to know you first." She was right, as always. In the first weeks, only Dorothy's customers appeared, curious to meet her new friend. They brought small jobs, trouser hems, zipper repairs, simple adjustments. I charged little, worked with care, delivered on time. Gradually, they started to come back, bringing more pieces, recommending me to friends. Meanwhile, life at home was also slowly adjusting. Teresa got a job as a clerk in a pharmacy near the house. It was less than she dreamed of. After all, she had been accepted to the university, but she understood it was temporary. Anthony, at 16, began working part-time in a mechanic's shop, learning the trade. Sebastian, still 13, continued only studying, although he helped on weekends, delivering finished sewing to customers who couldn't pick it up. Howard appeared at our door exactly 3 weeks after we left. He was different. Unshaven, deep circles under his eyes, wrinkled clothes. For the first time, I saw the man behind the impeccable facade he had always maintained. "I came to see the boys," he said without looking me in the eyes. I called Anthony and Sebastian. They went out with their father, went for ice cream in the square, to talk. When they returned hours later, they were lighter. Howard came every weekend after that, religiously. He never mentioned the subject of our separation again. He never asked us to come back. Perhaps he too was relieved, in his own way. The studio grew slowly. In March, I made my first complete dress for a lady who was going to her son's wedding. It was navy blue with embroidered details on the neckline. When she tried it on and looked at herself in the small mirror I had put on the wall, her eyes sparkled. "I've never felt so beautiful," she said, twirling to see how the skirt fell. That moment changed something inside me. It was no longer just about sewing to survive. It was about doing something that brought joy, that transformed. That same week, I ordered a small wooden sign for the door. Martha's Studio, Sewing and Transformation. It seemed pretentious at the time, but the name stuck. April, May, June passed in the blink of an eye. The work increased. The nights were long over the sewing machine. We bought another mattress, then a used refrigerator. In July, we got our first table with chairs, found at a thrift store. All sitting together for dinner around our own table was a small but significant victory. In August, I hired my first assistant, a lady named Nancy, who had worked in a clothing factory. She taught me techniques I didn't know, more efficient ways to cut fabrics, tricks for perfect finishes. I paid her what little I could and lunch every day. September brought a big order, uniforms for the school where Sebastian studied. The principal, who had been satisfied with the repairs I did on her clothes, decided to give me a chance. It was 25 sets for the staff. I worked day and night. Teresa helped me when she came back from the pharmacy. Even Anthony learned to do hems to lend a hand. We delivered everything on time. Impeccable. The payment allowed us, for the first time, to have a reserve. It wasn't much, but it was enough to breathe a little easier. It was in that month that I wrote a letter to my parents. Since leaving Mill Creek, I hadn't kept in touch. I was ashamed, afraid of what they would say, afraid of hearing that I should go back to Howard, but I was no longer the same fearful Martha. I wrote telling them what had happened, where we were, how we were managing. I didn't ask for anything, just informed. The response came 2 weeks later, written in my mother's shaky handwriting. "Daughter, we always knew you deserved more. We are proud of your courage. If you need anything, we'll be here." I cried reading those words, not from sadness, but from a kind of relief I didn't even know I needed to feel. My parents' support was like a distant embrace, confirming that I wasn't wrong, that I had made the right choice. The end of 1981 came, and with it our first Christmas in the new house. We didn't have much, but we had enough. A roast chicken on the table, a simple dessert, small presents but chosen with care. I looked at my children gathered around the table and felt immense gratitude. We had survived. More than that, we had started to truly live. 1982 brought growth. The studio now had a waiting list. I needed to hire another assistant. We bought real beds, a new stove, curtains for the windows. In March, Teresa finally managed to start college. She worked during the day, studied at night. Anthony finished high school and decided he wanted to be a professional mechanic. Sebastian, growing taller by the day, dreamed of being a teacher. In June of that year, I received an unexpected visit at the studio. It was Celeste, Mrs. Josephine's daughter. I was paralyzed when I saw her enter. More beautiful than I remembered, younger, although she was already almost 30. For a moment, I felt the old jealousy, the pain of betrayal returning. "Mrs. Martha," she said, her voice low. "I came to apologize." I couldn't respond. I kept looking at her hands nervously holding the strap of her purse. "What we did was wrong," she continued. "I was young. I let myself get carried away, but that's no excuse. I hurt you. I hurt your family." I took a deep breath before responding. "Why now, Celeste? It's been over a year." "Because my mother passed away last week," she said, her eyes watering. "And before she went, she made me promise I would ask for forgiveness. She said she couldn't die in peace, knowing I never took responsibility for what I did." I looked at her, no longer as the rival, the other woman, but as a woman who, like me, had made mistakes, made bad choices. I realized that forgiveness wasn't for her. It was for me. It was the last chain I needed to break to be completely free. "What happened with you and Howard?" I asked, surprising myself with the question. "It ended shortly after you left," she replied. "He became different, bitter, started drinking. I realized he would never really leave you, that I was just convenient." I nodded, understanding perfectly what she meant. "I forgive you, Celeste," I finally said. "And I thank you." "Thank me?" she repeated, confused. "Yes. If it weren't for you, perhaps I would never have found the courage to change my life. Maybe I would still be there, living half a life." She looked at me perplexed for a moment, then smiled timidly. I offered her coffee, which she accepted. We sat in the small office of the studio. Two women who had been united by the same man, now united by something different. A mutual understanding, perhaps even a strange kind of sisterhood. The following years were of constant growth. In 1985, we moved to a larger house with a room for each child. The studio expanded, now occupying an entire store on the main street. I had 5 employees, all women who, like me, were rebuilding their lives for different reasons. Teresa graduated in pharmacy in 1986. Anthony opened his own mechanic shop in 1988. Sebastian entered college for education in 1989. My 3 children, who arrived with me in Riverdale with only the essentials in their suitcases, were now building their own lives, their own dreams. In 1990, I received the news that Howard had passed away, a massive heart attack. I felt neither joy nor sadness, just a kind of distant compassion. We all went to the funeral in Mill Creek. The town seemed smaller than I remembered, more provincial, or perhaps it was I who had grown. At the funeral, several people came to greet me, looking curiously at the well-dressed woman with an upright posture, so different from the submissive Martha they had known. Some whispered, others pointed discreetly. I didn't care. I no longer needed their approval. I returned to Riverdale the next day to my life, my studio, my hard-won independence. At 52, I had rebuilt everything from scratch. More than that, I had built something I never had before, an existence entirely my own. In 1992, I took the boldest step of my professional life. I transformed Martha's studio into a small clothing factory, Martha's Creations. We started producing school and professional uniforms. Then we expanded to women's clothing. I hired more employees, bought more machines, rented a larger warehouse. It was hard. It was risky. There were nights when I wondered if I wasn't being too ambitious, but I always remembered what I had learned in life, that fear only has power over us when we allow it. At Christmas 1995, gathered with my now adult children and my first grandchildren, I looked around the abundant table and thought about the journey we had taken, from the small house with mattresses on the floor to that spacious room with beautiful furniture, from tears of despair to the laughter that now echoed through the house. "What are you thinking about, Mom?" asked Teresa, noticing my distant look. "About how unpredictable life is," I replied. "About how sometimes we need to lose everything to find who we really are." She smiled, understanding. Everyone there understood. They had made the journey with me step by step. They had seen the metamorphosis from betrayed wife to respected businesswoman, from voiceless woman to matriarch of a prosperous family. Martha's Creations grew over the years, exceeding my most optimistic expectations. In the early 2000s, we were already exporting to neighboring countries. Teresa left the pharmacy to manage the company with me. Anthony expanded his workshop into a dealership. Sebastian became the principal of the school where he studied when he arrived in town. And I became the woman I always should have been, strong, independent, fulfilled. The woman who woke up that Sunday in March 1980 to buy bread and discovered a bitter but liberating truth. Today, at 87, sitting in this chair, telling you my story, I realized that the betrayal I suffered was, paradoxically, the greatest gift life gave me. It was the key that opened the door of my prison, that forced me to face my fears, that showed me my own strength. That Sunday at the bakery wasn't the end of my life. It was the true beginning. As the 2000s arrived, I was already in my 60s, an age when many people think about retiring, slowing down. For me, it was the beginning of a new phase. Martha's Creations was thriving. We had more than 50 employees. Most were women, many of them in situations similar to what I had experienced. Single mothers, women starting over after difficult relationships, young people without opportunities looking for their place in the world. I always made sure that our company wasn't just a place to work, but a space where these women could regain their dignity, their independence. We offered childcare for employees with young children, incentives for those who wanted to study, an environment of mutual respect. In 2002, I received recognition that I could never have imagined when I arrived in Riverdale with 4 suitcases and 3 frightened children. The Businesswoman of the Year award from the Chamber of Commerce. I remember the speech I gave with legs trembling from nerves in front of an audience of business people, mostly men. I accept this award on behalf of all women who ever thought they weren't capable, on behalf of those who believed for too long in the limitations others imposed on them. On behalf of those who, like me, discovered too late that life begins when we decide to live for ourselves. I saw some women in the audience discreetly wiping away tears. Others nodded, recognizing in my story pieces of their own. That night made me realize that my journey wasn't just mine. It was a testimony, living proof that it's never too late to start over. It was in that same year that I decided to use part of the company's profits to create something new, a training center for women in vulnerable situations. A place where they could learn sewing, design, basic administration, entrepreneurship. We called it Project New Tomorrow. We started small in a rented room with 10 students. I gave some classes myself, sharing not only sewing techniques but life experience, the mistakes and successes, the strategies that helped me overcome difficult moments. Seeing those women, some very young, others already with gray hair like mine, absorbing every word, every teaching, filled me with a joy I can't explain. It was as if somehow I was helping all the Marthas who still lived submissively, afraid to take the first step. One of the students from the first class, Ivy, deeply marked me. At 50, she had left an abusive marriage of 3 decades. She came to the project without self-confidence, thinking she was too stupid to learn anything. My husband always said I wasn't good for anything beyond cooking and washing clothes, she told me one day, while struggling to make a straight hem. Mine said something similar, I replied, adjusting her hands on the fabric. But look where I am now, almost 70 years old, teaching other women. Our life doesn't end when a marriage ends, Ivy. Sometimes that's when it really begins. 6 months later, Ivy graduated with distinction. A year later, she had her own small repair business. 3 years later, she returned to the project, not as a student, but as a volunteer teacher. Seeing that transformation confirmed everything I believed in, that the strength within us only needs an opportunity to flourish. In 2005, at 67, I made an important decision. I passed the presidency of Martha's Creations to Teresa. She was already practically managing everything in the last years while I dedicated myself more to Project New Tomorrow. It was a natural, serene transition. I didn't feel diminished or replaced. On the contrary, I felt proud to see my daughter taking control of something we had built together. "Mom, are you sure?" she asked when I announced my decision during a family meeting. The company is your life. No, honey, I replied, smiling. The company is part of my life, but there are other parts now that I want to explore while I still have health and energy. One of those parts was the project, which continued growing. In 2008, we moved to our own headquarters, an old house that we renovated with great care. We expanded the courses, began serving not just women from Riverdale, but from neighboring towns. We created a mentoring system where graduates returned to advise newcomers, a chain of female solidarity that strengthened with each class. Another important part of this new phase was reconnecting with my roots. I began visiting Mill Creek more frequently. My parents had already passed away, but I still had brothers, nephews, cousins. The town had changed, grown in some parts, declined in others. Mrs. Josephine's old bakery was now a hardware store. On my visits, some people still looked at me with curiosity. The woman who left her husband, now returning as a successful businesswoman. Others would come to talk, ask about my life in Riverdale. I always responded politely, without resentment. The past no longer had power over me. In 2010, something happened that would again change the course of my life. During a class at the project, I felt a strong dizziness, then a sharp pain in my chest. The students called an ambulance, and I was rushed to the hospital. Diagnosis: a moderate heart attack. It wasn't severe, but it was a clear warning that at 72, I needed to slow down. I spent 2 weeks in the hospital. My children took turns staying with me. My grandchildren brought drawings and get-well cards. My students sent messages of support. I never felt so loved and so surrounded by affection as in those difficult days. When I was discharged, I needed to make changes. I reduced my hours at the project. I began to take better care of my health, to take light walks, to meditate. It was difficult at first. I had always been an active person. I always needed to be doing something. Learning to slow down was perhaps one of the biggest challenges I faced. But this quieter phase brought something precious. Time to reflect on my journey, to truly process everything I had lived through. It was when I began to write my memoirs in a small notebook, the same type of lockable notebook that I had bought for myself that Christmas of 1980 when I was planning my escape. Writing was therapeutic, sometimes painful when reliving difficult moments, but also rewarding when I realized how much I had grown, how much I had accomplished. I wasn't writing, thinking of publishing, or showing it to anyone. It was a dialogue with myself, a way of organizing the patches of my existence into a coherent fabric. In 2015, Project New Tomorrow completed 13 years. We organized a big celebration, gathering students from all classes. More than 200 women attended, many bringing stories of how the project had changed their lives. Some had their own businesses, others had gone back to school. Several had freed themselves from abusive relationships inspired by my story. That day, at 77, looking at all those women gathered, I felt that my life had a greater purpose than I had ever imagined. The pain I felt that Sunday in March 1980 had transformed into something powerful, something that transcended my own existence. If my story served for just one of you to find courage to change your life, I said in my speech, then everything was worth it. Every tear, every sleepless night, every moment of doubt. The following years brought new health challenges: high blood pressure, arthritis that made working with my hands difficult, a fall that resulted in a hip fracture. Each obstacle forced me to reduce my pace even more, to accept the passage of time, to recognize my limitations. But while my body aged, my mind remained active, my spirit alert. I continued involved with the project, even if only as an advisor and inspiration. Martha's Creations, under Teresa's leadership, expanded even further, opening branches in other cities, diversifying the product line. Anthony and Sebastian were also thriving in their areas. In 2020, when the pandemic hit the world, we faced new challenges. The factory had to adapt, producing masks and other essential items. The project temporarily became virtual. It was a difficult period of isolation for me, at 82, considered high risk. But even in this challenging moment, we found ways to continue our work. The project's students began making masks to distribute in underprivileged communities. We used technology to stay in touch, to give emotional support to one another. The solidarity and community spirit we had cultivated over the years proved stronger than ever. When things started to normalize in 2022, I had a big party for my 84th birthday. We gathered 5 generations of the family, my children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, and even a recently born great-great-grandchild. Looking at all of them gathered, I thought of the young Martha of 1980 with 3 small children and an uncertain future. If I could go back in time and whisper in her ear, I would say, "Don't worry, everything will be all right. More than that, it will be extraordinary." Today, at 87, sitting here, sharing my story with you, I have some certainties that life has taught me. That it's never too late to start over. I was 42 when I left everything behind, when many people already consider themselves too old for changes. That our inner strength is much greater than we imagine. We only discover what we're capable of when we have no choice but to be strong. That helping other women find their own strength is one of the greatest joys we can experience. Seeing the sparkle in someone's eyes who realizes their own worth for the first time is priceless. That happy endings don't happen by chance. They are built day by day, decision by decision, often amid tears and doubts. And mainly, that life is made of choices, and we always have the option to choose our own dignity, even when it means abandoning the security of the known and diving into the uncertain. If you're watching me and identified with any part of my story, if you're also at a moment of decision, at a bakery Sunday of your life, remember, you are stronger than you think. You deserve more than scraps. And it's never, ever too late to say enough and start over. That Sunday, when the baker told me the truth, wasn't the end of my story. It was just the first chapter of a full, authentic, and truly my own life. Thank you very much for listening to me. If you liked my story, don't forget to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and share with someone who might need to hear that it's possible to start over. And tell me in the comments, what was your bakery Sunday? What was the moment that changed the course of your life? I'm eager to read your stories. Until the next video, with more stories of life, overcoming, and hope.